Hi, and welcome to the Handbag Designer 101 podcast with your host, Emily Blumenthal, handbag designer expert and handbag fairy godmother, where we cover everything about handbags from making, marketing, designing, and talking to handbag designers and industry experts about what it takes to make a successful handbag. Welcome, Mary Gehllhar, to the Handbag Designer 101 podcast. Mary, the author, small business and sustainability consultant of the stars. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
I am good, and I'm so happy to be here, and it's so nice to see you again.
Oh my God.
It's funny, like the podcast is so great. I actually listened earlier today to the episode with Rafe, and Rafe was a designer that when I was the fashion director at Gehlhar, my first ever event he was part of in 1999. So when you were saying that he's been around a long time, I have also been around a long time.
Oh, first of all, I wish people could understand what a landmark tentpole Gehlhar was. It was truly the program to be part of. I think I applied to every single competition you had. I remember the fashion shows. I remember Zach Posen was part of it. Every single major player from that time came through Gehlhar, and that was the prize to have. Like, I was part of that. I was, how did all that come to be?
Well, and that's what people, it's hard to imagine now. It was such a different time, and nobody really cared about these small brands or these independent designers. Like, no one was that interested. And so, we realized that we wanted to create a platform to help independent designers and also like clothing, accessories, menswear, jewelry to really get up in front of the buyers and the magazine editors that at that time held the keys to everything.
Oh my God. Like, Lucky Magazine?
Absolutely. So many good magazines. And we really wanted to get all of these great brands doing such interesting new things in front of all of those people. And they were excited because that whole process of discovery is fun. And at that time too, before social media, was very difficult. And then we kind of we struck a chord and people started paying attention. And then we were involved with the development of Project Runway. And I cast the first 4 seasons of Project Runway, which was so much fun. And then now,
if I can use a kid's word, that's a flex.
Well, yeah, but also too, it just really gave so much access then and understanding of, what it is to be a designer and kind of some of the behind the scenes. And that's gotten even better. At first, like a lot of it was a little bit silly, like make a dress out of corn. But now I think the TV realities really have done a much better job at showing the true process of making clothes and, designing something and making it. And even a little bit, not so much, but a little bit glimpse into the business or the decisions you make as a business person.
Well, I must disagree with you on saying it was hokey because I just walked Toy Fair and I went into the USPS booth, United States Postal Service booth, and I talked to said individual about the redesign the postal uniform challenge. And that was on Project Runway, and we spoke about that for a long time because I'm determined, and I actually spoke with them after, I'm determined to work with them to create a postal bag challenge one way or another.
Oh, well, that's a great idea. But don't make it out of corn. I think what it was, at the first season, there were a lot of challenges that were kind of fun and silly. And then I think what happened is, the producers realized, oh, wait a minute, like people really want to know about making real clothes and how do we, and actually for the producers of the show, it was like, how do we get a success out of this? Like, because, it's not like you sing a song on TV and then, you put it out in the world. Fashion is so much more complicated. You design that handbag and the process of sourcing those materials and having the production done, getting it out in the world is a much longer,
it's a long game
product. Right.
I remember because Chris won the first season. Chris I forgot his last name, which sounds so awful, someone who won a prize, but it's kind of like I could tell you who won top model for the first 5 seasons, but I can't tell you who won after that.
It was a long time ago.
Oh my God, it's been a minute. But how did you fall into fashion? Was that you growing up? Was that, were you the paper dolls girl? Like, how did all that?
Well, I was definitely a Barbie girl growing up. And then I think I discovered fashion magazines. I grew up in the Midwest outside Minneapolis. And, it was, discovering fashion magazines and the whole world there. And then, MTV and Style with Elsa Clench and all of this like gorgeous world. It was just
aspiration.
And aesthetically so exciting. And so eventually, but it was different then. It was really hard to understand the behind the scenes of, what is a stylist? What is all those things that, again, it was all kind of smoke and mirrors.
Right.
So I moved to New York and actually got a job at Bloomingdale's in the corporate merchandising. And so
that's a plum job.
It was a great job and it was really fun. And I learned so much about the business.
How did you get that job? Was that like $1 in a dream? Like you sent a resume in and hope for the best and it?
Oh no, there were a few steps in between. But I think I met a friend who had temped in the office and said, "Oh, I'll give you a resume." Like it was it's like most things, it's usually someone you meet and a connection like that. And so I was working there, but also being that it was merchandising and it was all Excel spreadsheets. It's like what you're doing all day is looking at data. No, and it's just so much data about the sales and customers' credit card data, what's a good seller, what's not a good seller, what are the trends. And so for my creative side, I was styling on the side. And
how did that happen?
So there was a small up and coming menswear designer who I'd met through a friend and he needed help. So I would go and help him with his collections, he did some events, we did a show. And I also have a friend he's a commercial director. And so I was doing some styling for some of his shoots. And I actually they were auctioning off Princess Diana, a lot of her dresses she was having auctioned off for charity. And they were doing a special on TV called A Dress to Die For.
Oh,
and
that's
but about a week after we shot it is when she actually was killed.
Oh, God.
I know. And so then we're like, we're not doing that anymore. But I actually got to wear gloves and style all those gorgeous dresses, like the revenge dress on mannequins, which was so fun. And so through that, I heard about this little fashion show, in a, beat up old theater, which was Gen Art, which was kind of a fine art organization at the time. They were going to try to do something in fashion. So I went and met Ian, who was the director afterwards. And it was such a success and he was excited and he's like, I think we could do more with this. So I said, let me volunteer and help. And then it took off. And so then I became the fashion director. And then in the end, we were doing shows in 5 cities. We were doing big competitions, pulling thousands of designer portfolios in from all over the world. And it was amazing. And we had so much support from the industry. Everyone would come, Patricia Field.
That's because you were one of one at that time. Nobody else was doing it. I don't think now, I think about it because there's 𝐀𝐚𝐨, which is at this point one of the few that have left that are still remaining. And 𝐀𝐚𝐨 has moved over to the AI space and that's their hook. So that's their unique selling point. But
we were also never pay to play. We would we would choose people to be at the events and we would really tap into the industry to help us do that. So we would sit down in a big conference room with dozens of editors and stylists and buyers and go through 300 designer photos, 300 designers' photos they would send in and people would rate them and then they would write down the ones they liked and, be able to contact those designers. So it was a really amazing time and it really did create a whole new level of interest in fashion entrepreneurship. But what happened is I realized that I'm visiting all these studios and ateliers and meeting all these designers, and they're all working alone by themselves, all with the exact same questions and challenges. And that's when a book publisher had come to me and said, "Oh, what do you do here? Do you know someone who could write a book about the fashion industry?" And I said, "Sure, why don't you call Kathy Horn?" He goes, "But what do you do?" And when I explained it, he said, "Oh, well, that sounds like a great book for all these designers working away by themselves." And so that's when they asked me to write the Fashion Designer Survival Guide. And it was kind of to put all that stuff in one place, right? Production, financing, sourcing, marketing, all those, again, behind the scenes things that they just don't, that's the business side they don't teach you in fashion school.
Oh my God. First of all, I have a billion questions because that was a hearty update. So first of all, I'm like, no, there's so many things because everything you're saying was kind of a recipe of happy accidents that you made happen. I hate when people say it was luck because it's never luck. If you hustle and you work long enough in the same place doing the same thing and people find you, that's called results and, ROI of work put in. But how did you end up styling? Because you said, "Oh, I started working." Like, how did you know how to style? Like, how did you meet said designer and you were like, "Oh, I see what the deficits are. I see that your collection is missing XYZ." Like, how was that because you were working at Bloomingdale's and you felt the confidence that you could say you knew what was missing?
I wasn't really merchandising for him at that very beginning. Like that first guy really was like helping out, like most stylists when you're starting out, schlepping and pulling things and like doing a lot of steaming.
Did you want to be a stylist or you just liked this guy and you were like, "Hey, I can help you out. I'm happy to help because I'm Mary and I'm very nice."
Well, I did not want to be a stylist. What I was intrigued by is the fact that he's an entrepreneurial fashion designer. And I'm like, how does that work? And how are you going to get out there and get people to know about you? And how are you finding clients? And how are you making this stuff? All of that. Like it was the curiosity. And then I think too, I always raised my hand. And like, even when I was working at Bloomingdale's in corporate, I was volunteering at the fashion shows during Fashion Week, just to like be behind the scenes and see how things are done. And I think that's really key. And it's just raising your hand and being curious and following that curiosity. And then, if somebody's doing something that sounds interesting, it was like, well, how can I help? Right.
I mean, I think that's what your 20s are for. I think you should be involved in everything that comes your way and any opportunity, you should be there for it because getting exposed to all of those things, you can't put a price tag on it. You can't. And truly, who you know based on what you do and the job well done, it goes miles, especially now. So I think that's a really solid takeaway. But another point that you also volunteered for Gen Art whilst having, a taxing day job because, working at Bloomies, it's no rainbow. I know how those places are, and looking at those Monday morning numbers, it's not sexy and you get excited talent. You get to sit in the meetings, you go to the run throughs, you look at the collections, but then it always goes back to what leads to sales, what sells, why did it sell? And let's bring more of the same in. So how did you decide like, oh, here's this cool thing called Gen Art and I'm going to become close enough to Ian that he's going to see my talent and then invite me to leave my safe day job. I might have to like lose my insurance.
Which I did. Yes, it was a process. So first of all, Gen Art was tiny. I don't know that Ian was paying himself anything. It was, like I said, it started in fine art and they were doing kind of shows to kind of compete with the gallery scene, again, like focusing on up and coming artists who weren't getting picked up by the galleries. And so then he decided to just do fashion. So then what he did was create a group of volunteers and we would all go do this in the evenings. So it was after work and, would start out like, one night a week, everybody meet and brainstorm. And we're actually doing this a little bit right now in Chicago with a new organization called the 𝐀𝐞𝐬𝐢𝐢.
Is that his company?
Yeah.
He's in Chicago.
He's in Chicago and he started this and we've done we did a huge fashion show in May there. But it's also like, he's doing this with volunteers, and he just kind of tapped into this realization. There's a lot of great industry in Chicago, and it's amazing to get everybody in a room together. Yeah. And so it was similar. But then Gehlhar was all paid for by sponsorship. So he was able to land a big sponsor for a competition. And he's like, I need someone to run it. And I was like, I'll run it. And he's like, what about your job? And I'm like, I'll quit my job. So, it was a gamble. It was a huge gamble. And it was a huge, lack of stability and big paycheck. But again, I was young, and like, this is kind of this thing, like, you have to try.
You weren't married with kids. And it's so wild because I think, you strike me as a mildly thoughtful, intelligent, risk-averse individual. Like, you're not going to go jump off a bridge. But something like this, you'd be like, yeah, of course, I'm going to quit my job, and because this makes sense. Why wouldn't I do that? Like, that's to the core. You wanted to learn more and see more and be part of a process that already intrigued you to determine that that's really who you were. You wanted to work with designers, help the process. I mean, clearly you're good at it. And even with your book deal, because the process of Gehlhar is very similar to what I did with the awards, but I did it all by myself, and it was all sponsored run. And I had the opportunity to sell it a handful of times, but because it wasn't application or ticket based, nobody could replicate what I did with sponsorship. And sponsorship is an animal to deal with. And a lot of people just don't know how to go out and get corporate sponsors and get lots of money to fund an event and a 500-person, thing. It's a not easy behemoth to do. And if you know how to do that, that's a skill.
And that was the demise of Gehlhar, was the 2008 financial crash, was all the sponsorship money dried up. And we were in talks to be acquired at the time, and that dried up. And so it's too bad. But
if you ever wanted to start a handbag line and didn't know where to start, this is for you.
Living proof that independent designers can make it big.
Emily Blumenthal is one prime example.
If you had dreams of becoming a handbag designer and didn't know where to start, this is for you. If you have a handbag brand and are in need of strategy and direction, this is for you. I'm Emily Blumenthal, handbag fairy godmother and handbag designer expert, and this is Handbag Designer 101, the masterclass. Over the next 10 classes, I will break down everything you need to know how to make, market, and manufacture a handbag. Broken down for you that you'll not only skip steps in that handbag building process, but also save money in that learning curve. For the past 20 years, I've been teaching at the top fashion universities in New York City, created the Handbag Awards, and also the Handbag Designer 101 podcast. I'm going to show you like I have countless brands, from sketch to sample to shelf, whether you're just starting out and don't know where to begin, or even if you have a handbag line and just need some strategic direction, the Handbag Designer 101 Masterclass is just for you. So let's get started, and you will be the creator of the next it bag. Join me, Emily Blumenthal, with the Handbag Designer 101 Masterclass. How did you handle that? Well, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do?
I had already published both the first and second edition of my book by then. And it was all changing. And I think I was kind of ready to move on. And so, it was unfortunate all around, but it had kind of had its amazing moment and heyday. And, so it's, all good things must come to an end.
Honey, I get that. But my book deal, it took 6 years for me to get it. And, I had to kill myself to get it. And this is a funny story because all about who I actually had met my agent in jury duty.
That is so funny.
Well,
you never know.
If you're the person that talks to everybody and claims they're shy, which is me, it was grand jury duty, which was a month. And I looked around at all the wackadoos there. I think I've spoken about this. And she was the only one. Maybe she was wackadoo too. I don't even know how I look at these days, but she had a stack of bridal magazines. And, back in the day, you remember how big bridal magazines were. They were like an Encyclopedia Britannica, which also dates me. 12 of them stacked. Oh my God. Yeah. You could get it was like a Marc Jacobs bag. You could hurt your back wearing it. And she didn't have a ring. And if you snuff out our people, I knew she had to be at industry because nobody buys bridal magazines without a ring. Like there's no cause for that. So I immediately told her we were going to be friends. And then I immediately told her, I was like, you're not married and you have wedding magazines. Why? And she's like, oh, I'm a literary agent. And I said, what's that? And she said, oh, I publish books. I help find authors. And I was like, we're going to be best friends.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I had a licensing deal at the time, and it was still just me doing everything. And I was going on to QVC, and I already had my time where I was at Bergdorf's and Bendel's, and it was still all just me, smoke, buying mirrors. And I wish I would have met you, because then it would have made my life, I think, a lot easier. But she had said, like, okay, no one's going to publish your book now. And I said, well, my licensing deal came crashing down. I have the book written. What do I do? Because it's half business, half patterns and so forth. Kind of like to be a handbag designer, because there are so many less barriers to entry to do it than apparel, because anybody could truly be a handbag designer. So it was always, how do you look up a word if you don't know how to spell it? And that was kind of the premise of the whole book. And she said, you have to do something else in order to get people's attention within the handbag space to validate, because people just don't get deals overnight.
So you did the awards.
Except for you. Yeah. And I did the awards. I was like, okay, then I'll just start an award show. And she was like, okay, then do it. And I was like, okay, fine, then I will. And that's kind of the inception. And my background was in ad sales. So then I just started to going to all the people in the garment center, like the banks, the garment center improvement district, saying, would you give me money? And I know all these designers because I consult and I teach. And that's the inception story of the awards. But it's like stories like yours that really have an impact on so many small designers, to give them life, to realize that I don't need just to be a sad person in a room with a sewing machine, fingers and toes, hoping for the best. Crossed.
Right. And I think too, it's just that realization that when you go to school to learn to be a fashion designer, you're not learning how to be an entrepreneur.
No.
And so we started at Gehlhar, then we started doing business seminars to kind of talk about all the different topics, and, working with the CFDA to create a little more support for, up and coming brands. And, so, yeah. And then what's funny is I updated the book as it, became, as things kept changing. But then now jumping ahead, it was really during the pandemic that everything really changed. And I wrote the latest edition of the book because the industry had changed, the landscape for entrepreneurs totally changed.
Yeah.
And everyone is living, working, shopping, communicating in such new ways. And so it's entirely changed.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you can reach out to a factory on Instagram is kind of wild. So,
Yeah. And the fact too, again, that there's no longer these barriers, like you don't have to do what retail buyers are telling you to do. You can reach directly thousands of customers all over the world, directly through social media and things. And so it's like there's so much opportunity now, but that opportunity is really overwhelming because there are no more rules. You can really forge your own path, but that's hard to do. And so it's like, how do you navigate that?
Well, retailers now demand that you have a strong D2C business, because nobody wants to take a risk if you haven't done it on yourself first, if you haven't sussed out what the issues were. I mean, I remember my very first real buyer meeting was with Carrie Chapman from Barney's.
Yeah, of course. She used to come sit in on all the committees. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember her telling me, and I met her through, I want to say, the guy who had cut my hair, his girlfriend worked at Barney's, and I begged him for an intro. I mean, talk about like hustling. I was like, oh, can you ask her for Carrie Chapman's email? And that was before you could just figure out people's emails. Like, oh, yeah, of course it. And I had put my bags on the table, and I asked her, because I had heard about these run-through meetings. And I'd asked her, I was like, are we inviting more people in? Like, what do you need? I had some of my press on the table. And she whispered to me, she's like, put these away before anybody sees. You are not ready. And I was like, but, and she's like, you are not ready. And I'm like, okay.
But that is so powerful and good.
Exactly.
Good for her to do that. I think it's very important to know and have someone tell you that, because, you know, at the end of the day, there's that famous saying, like, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And, you know, it takes time
100%.
and the best thing is to go slow. And so I really appreciate any of those people in the field that will give honest and true feedback. And I love that you weren't crushed by it and decided.
Well, you don't know that, but yeah.
I don't know that, but I know you didn't. I know you didn't totally give up. So I'm sure you were crushed by it. But at the same time, it's like the ability to like, okay, that was painful, but I'm going to take this feedback and listen and go back to the drawing board.
100%. I mean, much like you understand when from all of this, that if you are committed to being a designer and a brand, then there's no turning back until you realize either I've come as far as I can go and I am not making this much money. The time value of money I put in they're not equivalent, or it's time, or I've aged out of this, or I can sell the brand and lucky me. So it's all relative, but it's 100% a learning curve process. And that's why I wrote my book. It's the same thing. And I must tell you, full transparency, your book was the biggest inspiration. And I remembered thinking like, oh my God. And I got to tell you, I was terrified that when my book came out, I thought you would be like mad at me. I was so worried, like, oh my God, is she going to think something? Because you were such a revered person within the industry. And to me, you still are.
Well, thank you so much for that. And at the end of the day, though, I do think that, like, you know, you had something to say about it and you'd gone through it from the lens of a handbag designer. And I think that's its own thing. Like, you know, the Fashion Designer Survival Guide applies to everyone. But at the same time, like, it's important too to kind of dig down into, you know, the niche that you're at. And you can never have too much.
I have it here, by the way.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like looking. It's like version 1, 2, or 3, but I definitely have it up there. So yeah.
Version 3.
Oh, it's so pretty.
Yeah, don't buy the old ones because they are very out of date. Because everything has changed. But I do think that, you know, it's good to have a lot of information out there. It's good to see it through different lenses. I do think that now, because there's so many ways to go about it, though, there's sort of two things that designers really have to think about before they launch. And that, to me, I always say I have two questions. What is your mission? Like, what are you making and why? Because
What's the why?
What's the why? You really have to know if it's because you're, you know, it's a niche in the market, you want to solve a problem, you have a passion for embroidery, you want to support an artisan craft, or you want to, you know, push forward a new sustainable material. It's really, you've got to know why you're doing this. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other big question is, what is success to you? Because it's different for everybody. There's no wrong answer. But, you know, it's easy to look at the industry and get very distracted by, oh, well, they did a runway show, or, oh, 100%. They did this collaboration, or they're getting into this store, they have 1 million followers on Instagram. But it's like, but what is your version of success? Like, we all have to pay the bills, and if you just want to get rich and have your name everywhere, there is no wrong answer. But for a lot of people, success is, you know, I just want to one day have my own store, or I just want creative freedom and to be my own boss, or, you know, I just want to, you know, keep a certain craft alive and bring attention to, you know, a certain kind of craftsmanship or a certain indigenous way of doing things. Or maybe success to me is, you know, addressing an underserved market. And so I think it's just, you have so many decisions to make as an entrepreneur. And if you know the why and you know what success is to you, that's the lens to look through every single one of those decisions.
That is some sage advice. That is gold, 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 Mary, gold.
Well, it's from years of watching people fail.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I know it's especially difficult, like the designers with whom I've worked, and I throw something similar to them. And I ran an incubator and the amount recently, and the defense comments, the comments that they're saying in their defense as to answering their why. And I'm like, but is that enough? What will that do? What is your end game? Like, and even doing this deeper dive of saying, like, do you really know who your customer is? Do you really know who she, they, he are? Like, go back and look at the orders, check your customers who the most from you, look at their addresses, check their zip code, then go on Google Maps to get a sense of the neighborhood, because not everybody's shopping for cool products is a metropolitan, very chic woman. Like, they might be plus size, they might be living in a tiny town, they may live in a place that has a stop sign, a Walmart, and a church, and a bar, and a school, and that might be it. But who are you to deny them something special? And if you now know who that's your customer, then you should be designing accordingly to ensure that you can serve that market, because you're making people happy and their money's green. So
you have to be customer obsessed. If you're a small brand, you cannot compete on price and speed. And you cannot be everything to everyone. And so there's kind of like three things I think of. You've got to be really focused, like back to that, what's my why? Being really focused, being something really special, because again, you can't be the fastest to market. You can't be the cheapest. You don't want to be. So what is that unique quality, that unique point of view, that hand-touched quality, story behind it? And then focus, special, and customer obsessed to really know, what are you really selling? Because we all have enough stuff. So a lot of times it's even beyond the demographics, getting into sort of the emotion behind why someone buys something. There's this amazing designer in Philadelphia who designs adaptable clothing for people who have a hard time dressing themselves. And so her father, who got older, he got dementia, but her father had always worn he was a sharp dressed man, always wore a button shirt with like a jacket. And as he was getting older and unable, losing the agility in his hands, the caretakers were putting him in these sweatshirts and like things that she said, so by creating button shirts with Velcro plackets and Velcro wrists where he could more easily get dressed and have that look that made him feel good about himself, she said, I'm not selling a shirt, I'm selling dignity. And it's like, so I'll challenge designers to even get beyond that demographic thing to even like, what are you really selling? Is it belonging? Is it status? Is it, altruism? Like, what is the real, even the emotion behind it? So I think, yeah, like you said, it is so about the customer, 100%.
I mean, this is like such a golden episode. I can't wait for it to go live for everybody to hear this. This is like the most helpful nuggets ever. I just want to get into, and I don't want to minimize any of this because it's also powerful and impactful, but sustainability is your jam. Rightfully so. You have become captain of this movement in such a way that we need more of you, Mary. So we need you in bulk. Explain, I mean, as opposed to, like more of what you're saying needs to be understood and put to task for these designers. Can you speak to your mission in terms of fashion and sustainability and what all this means and how designers can utilize small things to make changes within their line, collection, impact, and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just said we all have enough stuff. And, we all, in addition to all the other changes in the industry, is also just this really clear realization of how devastating fashion's impact is on people and planet. And I'm really, as a small business advocate, I really feel that it's a lot of the small brands that are driving a lot of the innovation and change. And that often that supporting small brands is a very sustainable thing to do as a customer, because sustainability is good business. Like if you're a small designer, you don't have unlimited funds. You can't make a lot of product and have it sitting around.
Right.
You have to be really careful with your cash. You want to focus on high quality. It's good to go slow and not, try to churn. Again, you can't compete on price and speed. So it's, I really think supporting small brands has a sustainability aspect to it. But I also think that when so many brands want to be sustainable, that can be really overwhelming. And there's so many issues. I'm a big supporter of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'm on the advisory committee for their Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network. And I don't know, most people have probably seen the goals, but it's 17 different aspects of sustainability. And I often tell a designer it's overwhelmed, like spend some time with those and pick 3 because it can be so overwhelming. I know the brand Ganni, when they started by picking 3 that they could really drill down then and, make all their decisions through the lens of, one of them was gender equality that they chose, responsible production consumption. And I think that for a small designer, if you pick, like say you're a handbag designer who works in leather, there's obviously, I think you're going to want to think about aspects of animal welfare and where you're sourcing the skins. And also because the tanning process is so chemical heavy, I think there's a lot of places where you can look for certifications. You can look for alternatives to a lot of the tanning methods. My favorite is like scrap and dead stock leather, especially if you're small. Like there's amazing bag lines that are working only in basically trash, like leather that would be in the landfill. And so, or it can be.
We actually had Fab Scrap on a few weeks ago.
Oh, I love them. That's amazing. Yeah. I'll have to listen to that.
Yeah. But, and I have Stephanie Benedetto coming.
Oh, great.
But she was a handbag designer and came through the Handbag Awards.
I did not know that.
That's her legacy. She was a finalist. So
it is a small world. But
it is.
But yeah, so, and then I think, it's just really important to help communicate, to your customers and, really communicating why things cost what they cost and why, how to take care of things, like how your bags. I mean, what's so great about handbags is the potential for longevity. It doesn't matter if you gain a few pounds. It doesn't matter if you can take care of them and store them. They can become legacy items. You can resell them. So they're an investment. And I think it's just really communicating what you're doing with your customers so they understand the thought and the process and the materials. And, we've become so removed from the process of how our things are made. And so I think that independent designers are so good at sharing that and communicating that to bring the customer in on this journey. Yeah. And, again, like just being more conscious about what we're making and what we're consuming.
Mary, I'm took my sustainable breath away. Unbelievable. Listen, this has been so amazing. I know that any designer or person within the industry or even somebody who is just interested in fashion overall could learn so very much from you and your platform and what you have to say. How can we find you, follow you, and learn more?
Fashion Designer Survival Guide is my website and a new tiny Instagram handle. But Mary Gehlhar, Gehlhar, is where you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram. So yeah, I would love to connect with more people there.
Wonderful. 2 H's before.
2 H's.
2 H's, just to throw that in. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being part of Handbag Designer 101, the podcast. You are a supreme person. Thank you so much. And
thank you. I love being here. And I'm a big fan of the podcast. So keep them coming.
Well, I encourage everybody to follow Mary, get her book. If anything, just to show people that you're smart, because it's such an incredible book. I'm ashamed. As soon as we finish, I'm going to be like, oh, here it is. But thank you so much. And there it is. Plug. All right. Thanks. And talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and review and follow us on every single platform at Handbag Designer. Thanks so much. See you next time.